So when you look at the economy now, the growth numbers came in very weak, under 1%, 0.7. Does it tell you that the economy has been a long, though somewhat modest recovery? Is it petering out? What's going on?
No, the first quarter numbers are probably just an aberration. We know that in the winter, the GDP numbers have been a little bit lower than they should be. Generally speaking, the recovery has been really good in the sense that we're down to 4.5% unemployment, 16 million jobs created since 2009. Inflation is low and stable. Gas prices are low. Stock market's up. A lot of things are very positive. Growth could be faster. That would be great. But underlying this growth pattern is slow growth in the labor force, population changes, and pretty slow productivity gains. But we are seeing improvements in wages. The latest employment cost index showed a stronger number. So in terms of the recovery from the crisis, things have looked pretty good, generally speaking. And I'd have to say that if you told me 3-4 years ago that we'd be where we are today, I would have been pretty happy to hear it.
So what do you make of then Donald Trump's recipe for the situation we're in, which seems to me to be a pretty massive tax cut? There is some reform, but the largest piece of it seems to be a very large tax cut designed to stimulate the economy. How do you react to it?
Well, I think that it is important, as I mentioned, even though the recovery is proceeding, the underlying growth path is not very strong. Productivity gains have not been very strong. And there are also other issues which probably help explain why Mr. Trump was elected, including inequality, lack of social mobility, lower participation rates among prime-age workers, and so on. So what we want to do is try to improve the supply side of the economy, make it grow faster, have greater potential. And I think that probably that to do that, I would think that on the fiscal side, that infrastructure spending that improves our roads, our bridges, our schools, and tax reform, not necessarily tax cuts, but reform that makes the system simpler, more efficient, those would probably be the highest return fiscal actions in terms of getting higher growth.
From the numbers you can see of the current bill, is the impact on the debt and deficit so large that it worries you? I mean, there are estimates that say it would add somewhere between $5 and $7 trillion to the debt over the next 10 years.
Well, yeah, it's a big issue. I mean, I think we don't have to balance the budget every year by any means, but we do have to worry about fiscal stability over the longer term. And even the most conservative, Republican-oriented tax policy centers, for example, have suggested that the tax cut along those lines would add a lot to the deficit. And again, if you're going to add to the deficit, you want to think about your priorities. Where do you want to put that money?
You'd rather spend it on infrastructure.
If I have to do that, if I have to increase the deficit, I think I'd rather do it on infrastructure and maybe tax reform.
Do you think Janet Yellen is doing the right thing in gradually raising rates?
Yeah, I think, while I don't want to be second-guessing her because, after all, she's the one in the chair, I think she's taken a cautious approach, but she's recognizing that the U.S. economy is now pretty close to full employment. We don't know exactly, but pretty close. Inflation seems to be gradually rising towards the Fed's target of 2% a year. So clearly it's appropriate to begin that process, and again, very cautiously, but I think so far that she has done a fine job and is helping to navigate the economy through some tricky times.
In your book, one of the central questions you're sort of trying to answer is, could we have prevented this crisis? And one of the things you say is, well, probably if the Fed had raised rates, you might have been able to have some effect on it. But I want to ask you a broader question. It does seem as though the hardest thing in a democracy is to inflict pain when it doesn't seem like there's a crisis. And for the last 20, 25 years, it seems like whatever our problem has been, the answer seems to be that at least is offered by the political classes, cut taxes or ease up on money. Do you worry that what we need to do sometimes is administer a certain amount of bitter medicine, certainly for the short run, and that's very hard to do in today's economy, in today's political context?
Well, certainly to some extent. I mean, it's hard to make tough choices, but it's also been hard to be subtle in the sense that there's a lot of people who are left out of the recovery. There's a lot of reduction in mobility. People are not able to move up the ladder the way they could some decades ago. Inequality is increasing. And I think there's a lot of things we could do about that, ranging from pre-K interventions to apprenticeship programs to programs to help disadvantaged youth, to infrastructure, a whole variety of things we could do, but they're complicated. They require a lot of bipartisan work, and unfortunately our system doesn't seem to be able at this point to put together a comprehensive program to address these problems.
So, but you're not hopeful that politics is going to get fixed anytime soon?
Well, you know, maybe over time the political winds will shift, but in the last few years, and I experienced this myself when I was chairman and I had to testify before Congress and so on, that the partisanship is extraordinarily strong, and a lot of it isn't really based on differences in economic interests. You know, for example, there's not that strong a correlation between people's income and who they voted for in the last election. A lot of it seems to be kind of voting for your team, you know, the same way you root for your college football team or whatever it might be. And that has a place, but it's going to make it harder for Democrats and Republicans to come together and agree on policies which are effective and which will really help the economy.